My spouse attacked me, and her kin scoffed. What sort of guy gets struck by a woman? I answered. The sort who keeps a record of everything. Then I showed the surveillance footage to the authorities. Her affluent family's attorneys couldn't dismiss the proof as she was taken into custody. I, a 38-year-old man, am holed up in a hotel room that carries a faint whiff of disinfectant and sorrow. It's preferable to the stench of my own home at the moment. My wife, Lauren, 35, has a spark in her. When we first met, it was exhilarating, a fervor that made the world seem more vibrant. But over recent years, that glow has morphed into a wildfire bent on destruction. It began with objects. A dish smashed against a wall, a tablet hurled with enough force to shatter its screen. Irritating, costly, but objects are just objects. Last night, it stopped being about objects. The cause is so trivial, so mundane, it's almost humiliating to write. I forgot to grab the particular organic almond milk she prefers for her morning cappuccino. Not just any almond milk, the kind from the upscale market across town that costs $10 a carton. I'd had a grueling day at the office and it completely escaped my mind. The verbal onslaught started the second I stepped through the door. I was worthless, thoughtless, self-centered. I've learned to weather these tempests. I stood there, absorbing it, waiting for the gale to blow over. But then she pushed me, a forceful, two-handed shove to my torso that sent me staggering back. I collided with the edge of our granite kitchen counter, the corner jabbing painfully into my spine. Lauren, this is absurd, it's just milk. That was my error, challenging the legitimacy of her fury. She struck me, not a theatrical soap opera slap, but a sharp, stinging blow across my face that left my ear buzzing. Before I could even register it, she came at me again. It wasn't a frantic flurry of slaps. It was deliberate. A few solid punches landed on my chest, my arms. I just raised my hands to shield my face. I didn't shove her back. I didn't even speak. I waited for her to finish. When the storm died down, she stood there panting, her face glowing with triumph. I turned silently, grabbed my keys and wallet, and left. The first person I contacted was her sister Megan. I thought she, of all people, might be a voice of reason. I was mistaken. After I recounted what happened, there was a long silence on the line. Well, Megan said, her tone laced with mocking disdain, what did you do to provoke her this time? I was dumbfounded. She assaulted me, Megan, over milk. Then she laughed, a short, harsh, cruel sound. Really? Come on. What kind of man gets hit by a woman? She's what, 115 pounds dripping wet? You're being a bit theatrical, aren't you? Her husband, Greg, joined the call, his voice a smug drawl. You need to toughen up, man. Go home and deal with it. Don't play the victim. Victim. That word flipped a switch. The haze of shock and pain cleared, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. They weren't just defending her. They were ridiculing me for being the one hit. My pain was their amusement. I returned to the house this morning. Lauren was in the den, sipping her coffee, made with the backup, subpar almond milk, I noted with detached irony. Her parents were with her, positioned on the couch like a pair of polished sentinels, a united front. Her father, a man whose personality is 90% luxury cufflinks and 10% unsolicited financial wisdom, stood as I entered. Son, he said, his tone patronizingly gracious, let's not let a minor spousal spat spiral out of hand. We can resolve this here, within the family. I didn't look at him. I looked at Lauren. Her expression was self-assured, defiant. She expected an apology. I walked to the wall-mounted panel that controls our home's smart features. I tapped the screen, pulling up the security app. You know, I said, my voice steady, almost casual. Megan asked what kind of man gets hit by a woman. I saw confusion flicker across their faces, then a spark of worry in Lauren's eyes. I have an answer now, I continued, hitting play on a file from last night. The kind who keeps evidence of everything. I'd installed the cameras 6 months ago. We'd had a series of missing items. A necklace of mine, some cash from a drawer, coinciding with visits from her perpetually broke brother. I told Lauren they were only for the exterior doors and windows. I wasn't truthful. They were in the kitchen and den too. High resolution with pristine audio. The footage played on the 70-inch TV above the mantel. Every word, every push, every punch. The sound of her fists hitting my chest was chillingly clear in the silent room. I watched their faces. Lauren's confidence crumbled into raw fear. Her mother's hand shot to her mouth. Her father's face went from smug certainty to a pale, ghostly white. As the video version of me walked out, I stopped the playback. The doorbell chimed. Lauren found her voice, a shrill scream. "You spied on me? You recorded me in my own home?" "I recorded a crime," I corrected, as two officers stepped into the room. I'd called them from the hotel. I'd uploaded the footage to a secure cloud and sent the link to the responding officer. They saw my face, the swelling, the faint bruise forming around my left eye. They saw the video. Her family's high-priced lawyers can twist many things, but not crystal-clear footage with perfect audio. She was still yelling about her privacy as they cuffed her. The silence in this house is tangible, oppressive. It trails me as I move from room to room. Lauren is out on bail. Her father's wealth moves quickly. The first salvo came yesterday morning, not as a call but an email in my inbox. It was from a man identifying himself as the family's attorney. The language was polished, dripping with costly assurance. He used terms like regrettable household dispute and a mutual misunderstanding. He hinted that my role in the marital strife would be scrutinized in any legal proceedings. Then came the offer, cloaked in slick legalese, a substantial six-figure sum for my emotional and physical distress, contingent on signing a confidentiality agreement and telling the DA I wanted to drop the charges. It was a bribe dressed as a settlement, and he was bold enough to put it in writing. I didn't respond. I forwarded the email, headers included, to my own attorney. I've been proactive. My grief lingers, a quiet undercurrent, but my focus is on deliberate action, the law. My first call after the police was to a divorce lawyer with a fearsome reputation. They call her the Bulldog in legal circles. I've met with her. I provided the police report number and the footage link. When I sent her the email from Lauren's lawyer, her reply was curt. "This is Gold, the Fortress. A temporary restraining order is in place. Lauren can't come within 500 feet of the house or my workplace. The finances. My lawyer filed for divorce and an emergency motion to freeze all marital assets pending discovery. A judge approved it this morning. I took a copy of that court order, not just the police report, to the bank. The manager had no choice. Our sizable joint savings and checking accounts are frozen. Any withdrawal needs a court order. My paycheck now goes to a new separate account. I've methodically changed every shared account, streaming platforms, online shopping, music subscriptions, even our cloud storage. New passwords for all. It feels petty, but every failed login attempt she gets is a reminder that her actions have repercussions. Last night I found one of her silk scarves draped over the bedroom chair. For a moment, a pang of something, nostalgia, loss, hit me. I recalled buying it for her during a trip years ago, the woman I thought I'd married, the one who smiled and held my hand. Then I saw my reflection in the mirror. The bruise around my eye has deepened into a grim palette of purple, blue, and sickly yellow. I picked up the scarf. It still held a trace of her fragrance. I carried it to the garage and tossed it into a trash bag. The memory faded. All that remained was the evidence. Update: the Cold War. The conflict has turned covert. No more overt attacks, just a barrage of subtle smears and entitled demands. Megan, my sister-in-law, has taken on the role of Lauren's spokesperson. I've gotten texts from mutual friends. They start with a concerned, "Hey, just checking in," but quickly shift to, "Megan said things were really strained before the incident." What's her side? They're not asking for my perspective. They're probing for validation of a story that I was controlling, that I pushed her to it. My response is consistent, brief. "Thanks for checking in. It's a legal matter now, so I can't discuss details. The evidence will come out in court." It's a maddeningly airtight stance. I'm not engaging. I'm not defending myself. I'm pointing to a future where the truth will be undeniable. I'm letting them reveal their true selves, and Megan's painting with a wide, ugly brush. Lauren has started testing the restraining order's limits. She's blocked on my phone, so she's resorted to emailing from a new account. The first email was tearful. The second accused me of ensnaring her and breaching her trust. The latest arrived this morning. "You've destroyed my life over one small fight." One small fight. Every email has been saved as a PDF and sent to my lawyer and the detective. Each is another piece of evidence, a clear pattern of harassment violating the TRO. Then came the doorbell. Saturday morning, while I was brewing coffee, the ring alert popped up on my phone. It was Greg, Megan's husband, on my porch. He jabbed the bell again, his face a mask of impatient hostility. I didn't open the door. I activated the speaker. "Can I help you, Greg?" "Dude, open the door. We need to talk." "No, we don't. You're on my property, Greg." "Don't be a jerk," he sneered. "This has gone far enough. You're tearing this family apart over a damn slap." "It wasn't a slap, Greg, and you know it. Lauren tore this family apart when she chose to assault me." "It was a fight. Couples fight. You didn't have to call the cops. You could have handled it like a man." "Being a man means not hitting your partner, Greg," I said, my voice icy, "and not excusing those who do. You're trespassing. I'm recording this. Leave." I saved the video, another piece for the file. The final insult came in a letter from her new lawyer, demanding access to the house for her personal items. My lawyer replied within the hour. "We set a 4-hour window next week. My lawyer hired an off-duty officer as a neutral third party. He'll have a copy of our prenup, which details what she owned before the marriage, and a 9-page inventory of shared household items. She'll get exactly what's hers. Nothing more." Final update. The verdict came last week. It's done. Lauren's family threw a fortune at the issue. They tried everything. They moved to suppress the video evidence. The judge, after reviewing the footage in context, rejected it outright. They tried to portray me as a cold, scheming villain. That story collapsed under the weight of my evidence. Lauren's harassing emails, the initial bribe-like offer from her first lawyer, the doorbell footage of Greg. My refusal to engage in their drama made me seem composed, not manipulative. Facing a jury trial, they knew they'd lose badly. They caved. Lauren took a plea deal, pleading guilty to misdemeanor domestic battery. It's not the felony the DA initially sought, but it's a permanent public record of violence. Her sentence: 2 years probation, a court-ordered 52-week anger management course, a hefty fine, and a permanent restraining order. The fallout was sweeping. Her employer, a premium family values brand, terminated her. The charge, even a misdemeanor, breached her contract's ethics clause. The story spread through her professional network. Last I heard, she sold her luxury SUV to pay legal fees and moved back with her parents. Megan and Greg's smear campaign backfired. When the truth emerged, their efforts looked like enabling an abuser, not supporting a loved one. Her father's arrogance had consequences too. In his fury, he made heated calls to business partners, demanding they sever ties with a company I'm loosely tied to. One partner, a key investor in 2 of his major projects, got alarmed, not by me, but by the father's erratic behavior and the risk of being linked to a domestic violence case. To safeguard his interests, he ordered a full third-party audit of their joint ventures. It's a costly, messy ordeal born of the father's own outburst. The assets. The divorce finalized last month. Her guilty plea gave my lawyer all the leverage needed. I kept the house and a larger share of our savings. The last detail, settled last week, was a $2,850 security deposit on a high-end apartment her brother rented 2 years ago. Lauren had co-signed the lease. He bailed. The management company pursued her. Since our assets were still entangled, the demand letter went to my lawyer. We paid it from the frozen joint account before the final split. My lawyer then argued successfully in the divorce that the $2,850 was her debt alone, reducing her payout by that amount. A precise final administrative win. And me, I'm fine. There was no dramatic moment of them crumbling, pleading for forgiveness. They remain resentful, convinced I'm the bad guy. Their view of me no longer matters. The house is quiet now, a calm quiet. I repainted the kitchen a soft, neutral beige. I host a weekly card game where friends can prop their feet on the table without fear of an outburst. It's not a victory that sparks joy. There's no cheering, just relief, deep relief from a storm that's finally passed. I look in the mirror now, and the bruise is gone. I don't see a victim. I see a man who, when pushed to the brink, didn't lash out. He didn't yell. He documented. And in the end, that was more than enough.